Barnes & Noble Union Square. Please give a warm welcome to Christine Pride, Joe Piazza, and Miwa Messer.
I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, but mostly we're just hanging out tonight with two very smart, very funny women who've done a very, very cool thing. A second time in a row, Joe Piazza and Christine Pride have written jointly another novel about tough stuff. I quite admire what you guys have done because it's not easy, as we all know, to have these conversations, right? And some of us, occasionally have people in our lives who actively do not want to have these conversations, right? And that's really fun. Oh my God, that's so awesome. Oh, and it's Loving Day today, so even more fun that we're doing this conversation on Loving Day.
It really is. Poignant.
Yeah, a little trippy, right? But one of the things I really appreciate about the way the two of you handle the work, and we are going to get to the new novel, I promise, is that you talk about how hard it is. Like, you're not pretending this stuff is like la la la. And yes, you're friends. And yes, you like what you're doing and everything else. But you are not pretending. And wow, I am grateful for that. Yeah. So can we talk about the process? Can we talk about how you guys got together to do all of this? And how hard it was? Because that's not a little thing.
Yeah, or meet cute.
I know.
Do you want me to do it this time?
Yeah, you start with meet cute, and then I'll go into the hard part.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. She really likes it when I do this part because I say something that she likes. So Christine was my editor on my last solo novel, Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win. And she was one of the best editors that I've ever had. I have two other editors in the audience right now. Hi, guys. Love you. Up until that point, she was the best editor I'd ever had. And we became fast friends and really liked working together. And after Charlotte Walsh, Christine got tapped to do this really quick project for the TV show Younger. Do we have any Younger fans here? Yeah, because you guys all work in publishing. And we had 4 weeks to write the book Marriage Vacation, and it just blurred the line between editor and really co-writer because we had to write it so quickly with so many crazy edits. I've never been told to make a sex scene dirtier 5 times.
Joe and I are we prudes?
And we're
every time we turn into the people.
I'm like, I don't even know what else they can do in this book.
Darren Star is very
Darren Star, guys. And so after that, we knew we wanted to keep working together. And Christine had long had an idea for a book. As an editor, I feel like editors are always thinking of ideas that they don't see in the marketplace. And I think Christine kind of proposed to me on a lark, maybe we'll talk about this one day. And I was like, great, we're doing it right now.
In typical Joe style.
Yes, and we did, and it was for We Are Not Like Them, and I'll let you take it over from there.
But as just to follow up on what Miwa was saying, we agreed to write this book together, and it was a book about a friendship upended by police violence, and we had to talk about race.
Right.
We had to dive in really quickly and have really hard conversations very fast and very deeply and vulnerably, and that's not easy to do under the best circumstances, just in our lives. That is proven time and time again. Race is one of the hardest subjects to talk about, but it's definitely does not make it any easier when you are, sort of thrown together with a deadline and all the other creative challenges. And so we were really in the thick of it, having to have these hard conversations, but we're really honest about it because it is hard. And I think a lot of times when people don't want to acknowledge how hard it is, then it seems like they're doing something wrong or they're, you just have to be prepared that it's going to be hard, accept that it's going to be difficult and push through to the other side. And we're also honest about that because we did that, right?
Yeah,
so we like to think that we are both a cautionary tale and a happy ending about, what happens when you can and stay the course and keep talking and keep the lines of communication open and just push through.
Right. So then you decide to make it wicked easy and write about motherhood in the second book, because why not, right? Why not? Why not
Who
just...
knew that would be harder?
You could have done a shopping novel. You could have, I don't know.
Your lips to God's ears.
But motherhood? Really? Let's... Motherhood, race, secrets and lies, secrets and shame. I mean, shame is a huge part of this book, obviously. And not to leave out the hope and the love and the good stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff, and you have to have both, right? You can't, it's relentless, right? If you have just the book where the terrible things happen, but I have a question for you that we're going to get to in a second. These characters are great. Cinnamon and Daisy. And, Cinnamon's what, 30-ish? She's
right.
married to a dude who's not all he pretends to be. And we are going to keep this spoiler-free because technically the book goes on sale tomorrow. So some of us have read this book before the rest of you, and I'm not ruining it for you. And then we've got Daisy, who's 19, and neither of them has a particularly easy situation of it. Let's put it that way.
That's accurate.
Cinnamon's background is really complicated. And, Christine, one of the things you said when you were talking about the first book a lot was you didn't want Riley to have one of those stories where everything goes off the rails, everything's wrong. It's a hard, she has a very sort of nice, stable middle-class life, right? This happens. Some of us have nice, boring middle-class lives, but that doesn't always make for great fiction. And Cinnamon's background is really complicated. And I have to say that surprised me a lot, given what both of you had said about the first book, where you were very deliberate in your choice to make sure that everyone understood that there was sort of this different playing field. I mean, at one point, Cinnamon has no parents, and that's really all I'm going to say about that. And the world is a very different experience for her, and that colors how she sees her ability to be a mother.
Yeah,
and that's what we needed to do. I mean, we wanted to create a character, obviously, that had a lot of complications in her backstory because that informs her choices and decisions and agonizing about motherhood. And it's really interesting, that obviously Joe and I want to stay away from tropes and stereotypes and so forth, but it's something that Cinnamon even acknowledges in her, in the beginning of the book that, part of the shame that she has in terms of the trauma of her backstory is that, she feels like another statistic. She feels like a stereotype. She is worried about people judging her as a stereotype. And yet, in adulthood, now that she's in her 30s, she has created a life with a great job, stable home. She has really defied the odds in a lot of ways, and she understands that and embraces that. And some of her emotional struggle is around this idea of, because she defied the odds so much, because she has risen above so much difficulty and trauma, what else does she have the right to ask for or want, right? Like, she wonders, is this enough for her? Meaning her, we won't get too into Jason, but her husband who, has his flaws and her job that she loves but could do more, right? I mean, I think we all have that sense of yearning of, I like my life as it is, but what else could it be?
Right.
And Cinnamon really is plagued by that sense. And so when this dramatic thing happens to her, it sort of serves as a catalyst to really bring that question to life, which is, what do I actually really want from my life?
Right.
And do I deserve it? Do I deserve more? And I think that that's something that women grapple with so often, especially as we hit our 30s, as Cinnamon's vague 30-ish age. Do I deserve more than this? And Cinnamon has grown up with so much shame in her past. She doesn't believe that she does. And but I do think that her journey, she's in a very different place by the end of the book.
Oh, yes. It's really satisfying.
Yeah.
I will say, okay, that's the one hint I'll give you. It's very satisfying.
Spoiler alert, the novel is very satisfying.
Deeply emotionally satisfying.
I'll take that as a blurb, actually. I would just like on the cover of the paperback, quote, very satisfying. I'd buy that book.
I mean, I am trying to dance around some stuff because, I really do want to dance around some stuff. But I was not expecting her to be as open to the idea of being a mother as she was. And not just because of her background, but she has, even though she's married, she doesn't have great support. Her mother-in-law is her mother-in-law. Some people have blind spots,
with all
right?
that implies.
Yeah, I mean, some people have blind spots, right? And yet here she is saying, okay, I actually want to go forward with this. And the way you present motherhood, not just for Cinnamon, but also for her best friend, and for the mothers-in-law, and there's an aunt that pops up. There's some women who all approach motherhood really differently, and I love that nuance, and I really appreciate that nuance. But when you're sitting down to map this out, I'm assuming Cinnamon and Daisy sort of showed up first, the way Jen and Riley did, right? They're a pair. I mean, you need both of them. But when you're mapping out the rest of the story, And it's a tight cast, which I really appreciate. What's next? I mean, you have these two women, and how do you start to turn the heat up a little bit?
Well, we knew that we wanted to show so many different ways of mothering, being a mother, and choosing family. And so when it came to kind of the supporting cast of characters who are in Cinnamon and Daisy's life, and we wanted all of them to show up in the world mothering, being mothered in a different way. And just to put this book in perspective, we had the idea for it in 2018, and well before the Roe v. Wade decision, finished the book mostly before the decision came down, and then everything felt a lot more fraught after that with the policing of women's bodies and taking away choices. And I'm not giving away too much to say, one of our characters in the book is a human being in the world who can also try not to give away spoilers. I'm the worst spoiler giveawayer, by the way.
I'm like, you're allowed to say she's a woman.
She's a woman.
A human being in the world.
She's a human in the world who doesn't want to be pregnant, who does not want to be a mother. And she genuinely doesn't have options. And we wanted to explore that because one of the things that we really believe is that we often see one kind of mother in the media, and that is a very white privileged mother who chooses to have a baby when she's ready and goes on maternity leave and has a supportive spouse. And we don't see all of the other mothers, which are 95% of mothers in the world. And we wanted to show those women.
Yeah, and we also wanted to show the ambivalence around motherhood. Like so many stories about motherhood are sort of after the baby comes, right? And then it's, all range of, motherhood memoirs around what that experience is like. But before that happens, there's a lot of grappling with, do I want to have a baby? When? How? Can I afford it? What are my circumstances? Do I want to have it with this partner or not? And we don't really see that enough. And so in this case, we have two women who are in very different circumstances, but they are grappling, with these issues. And our hope was to show how complicated that can be, that people can choose to be mothers or not to be mothers, or how they become mothers might not be a conventional path, but there are all these other, gray areas out there that are contrary, as Joe said, to, what we mainly see, the main, more common narratives. And we wanted to twist that on its head.
I mean, it feels like for a long time we didn't even have more than one perspective on motherhood in books, right? I mean, remember when We Need to Talk About, I'm really dating myself here for a second, but when We Need to Talk About Kevin came out, and suddenly there were all of these off-the-book page features about how people actually hated motherhood. And I was like, well, you should probably have possibly thought about this before. Maybe you did that, but okay. But it was trippy. It was really trippy to see all of these lifestyle pieces where everyone was like, yeah, I really, oof.
Or like, are you allowed to say that?
Yeah, Kind of and then it turned into
and then everybody
mommies.
Did it.
Yeah, and then it was like, well, as long as...
slate of like the drunken mommy, scary mommies.
All of it. And I'm like, okay, I'm really happy being an auntie. I mean, that's sort of my comment on all that. I love being an auntie, but the rest of it, I was like, not for me, thanks very much. But the idea that we're having these conversations now, like, we've never really had these conversations. Like, how many times have you actually sat down with a friend? I mean, now you can because you have this book, but it was trippy to me that it felt like everything you were talking about in You Were Always Mine was brand new. It's 2023.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things that is really, really brand new is the idea of a black woman taking in a white baby, right?
Well, there's
that is like
there's
the main, you don't see that. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so that is, and especially relative to the flip side of, we are so conditioned to think about and to see and to have that be a part of pulp culture of, white people taking in black and brown children that we don't even like bat an eye. Like, it's not even, I mean, you wouldn't even notice on the street. You wouldn't, you would not think about it. And yet when you have the reverse, which is, the case in this book, it really is, sort of provocative at face value and shocking because it is so, so rare. And so that is something that we really wanted to start a conversation about. Why is that so, in 2023 or whatever year we're in?
What is time?
Like, I don't know. it's still too late, that we feel like these conversations or this scenario is uncomfortable.
Right.
Or at least noteworthy.
But it is, and we already know that it's jarring to some readers too. And it's shown up in some of the reviews of the book where there's comments made saying, I couldn't keep going because what Cinnamon did was illegal. And
wow.
First off,
she should have immediately gone to the authorities.
Right. And so first off, one, it actually wasn't illegal, but also characters can do illegal things. And like that's a thing that people in fiction can do. But beyond that, what you really want to do is be able to, turn it around on someone and say, would you have had that reaction if it were a white woman who found a brown baby in the park and just wanted to get her ducks in a row to make sure everything was okay? I don't think that they would have that reaction. They would be like, this is a movie with Sandra Bullock.
Yeah, 100%.
It was, wasn't it?
I believe so.
I think there were a few of
she
them.
won. She did win an Academy Award for that.
So I want to grab a couple of customer questions for a second because they're siblings to each other. One is, what is your favorite part of collaborating together? And then what was the biggest surprise working together? And I know you sort of talked about the biggest surprise, but at the same time, I think there's probably a little looser, funnier moment that might have been the biggest surprise.
That we can talk about in public.
I surprised Christine today. She got new knowledge about me today.
Today, I learned that Joe's middle name is Christina. I was today years old.
Yeah.
We were on a video shoot.
We were
And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. True story. True story. We also got asked the question, and we did like social media video shoot today where we did like TikToks and things.
We played the newlywed game. Like,
we played the newlywed game. Yeah.
And so this is going to be awkward when we fail this.
I never knew you at all. We both got asked what our favorite part about the process was. And mine, we both agreed that we like eating delicious food when it's finished. And that mine was, we get to read out loud to each other, which, if you're writing a novel on your own, it can be really lonely. But we get to read the entire book out loud. Like, no one loves your book as much as you do. Nick doesn't want to read my books out loud with me.
She called you out this morning in the video shoot. She said, Nick doesn't listen to me read all of my books.
He doesn't.
From start to finish.
Out loud, yeah.
Just saying.
Out loud, yeah. See, he's like, no, I will not. But I think they're better for it because we catch things and the dialogue gets so much stronger. And especially when you're doing what we're doing, which is taking difficult issues and putting them on the page.
Right.
I think it matters even more that the dialogue feels real.
Yeah,
because
completely.
it could really easily stray into caricature. And with both books, we were able to not do that because we got to read out loud to each other. Yeah. And Christine makes me do it in my podcast voice. So
She'll be just talking in a normal voice.
I'll be like just talking like this, and then I'm like, chapter one. And
I'm so here for it.
I'm Joe Piazza.
Yeah, it's that half octave that you drop and you're like, right.
It's like the gurgle in your
It's also kind of a reminder to not swear on a hot mic. I have so many reminders for not swearing when I do this.
Don't worry, I just sound shrill and high-pitched all the time when I'm doing it, so it's fine. For me, mine was the brainstorming at the beginning, because, and especially it's nice to have another person to do that with, right? Because we spend a lot of time before we're even writing, as you said, you're thinking about who are these women, right? Who are Daisy and Cinnamon, or in Riley and Jen's case, who are they? And so we just, sit and talk on the phone, which is some of the rare times that we're actually collaborating on the phone. Right. Like a lot of times it's more, we're just in a Google Doc. But I love the beginning of the process because sky's the limit. Like anything's possible with these characters. Anything could happen. And we just, keep narrowing it down to what about this? What about this? And it's really fun to feel like you have that sort of
the full multiverse is available.
Like that power of creating.
Do your characters actually surprise you though?
Yeah, all the time. All the time. Yeah, there's lots of things that we don't expect to happen, and that's kind of the magic of book writing, right? Yeah. That you can have the best laid plans and the best outlines. Christine loves outlines.
Oh, God.
So much. And I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants, which drives her crazy. Then your characters do things that you don't expect them to do. You're just like, oh my God, yes, of course this is what's going to happen. And that feels like that's the magic in fiction, I really think.
But also we gave, no spoilers, but we gave Daisy and Cinnamon a lot of obstacles. I mean, the same with Riley and Jen. We packed on a lot for them that they had to overcome in their past. and in their present, in the book. And so we really found ourselves rooting for them. And it was nice to feel like, well, we have, to some degree, the power, right, to give them the satisfying endings, to help them get to the emotional places that we wanted them to get to as people. And that is really satisfying, we hope, as a reader, but it's definitely satisfying as a writer to be able to kind of create that and have it be earned and not just like, and then they change their lives.
And one of the things you do in the new book that I quite liked was dropping in letters. You will find out who wrote these letters and to whom they are writing these letters. But the idea that you could sort of dial up the intimacy, right? Like, is there anything more intimate than reading someone else's correspondence? Like, it's more than even eavesdropping. There's a reason we like epistolary novels, y'all. There's a reason we like them as readers. But stylistically, you made a couple of other big choices in this book, and I'm wondering how much of that comes out of what you learned writing We Are Not Like Them, and how much of it was just, we want to try something new because why not, we can, and we have this working relationship that's really solid.
Yeah. Well, we definitely wanted to write an epistolary novel. Like, we both love them, and so when we started this, we wanted letters to be a part of it, and it was a good way to bring in another character's point of view.
This is different than We Are Not Like Them. We Are Not Like Them, the chapters alternated between Jen and Riley. And with this is mainly Cinnamon's story with the letters interspersed. And we really wanted to try something different and a different kind of style. We wanted Cinnamon to own her own story. That was also, because of everything Cinnamon's gone through in her life, it felt nice. She deserved that agency.
But it's also hard, I think. I mean, Jo can speak to this more because she's written many more books than I have. I've lost count. But, it's as a writer, you have this fine line between, we loved writing We Are Like Them. It worked, you know what I mean? Like, we felt good about the story and the storytelling. And so it's like this tension between how can we recreate that magic? At the same time, how can we do something completely different? Because you also don't want to just keep writing the same book over and over again. And so that's...
Some authors do.
Some authors do. No names mentioned. But, that's something that we, if not, outright struggled with, was something at least, in the back of our minds of, what is that latitude there, especially when we're dealing with, to some degree, similar subject matter, right? Like, we keep wanting to look at race through these different kind of entry points, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we do that in a way that feels fresh and unique?
You talk about class a little differently in this book, right?
We do.
So, Aunt Cecilia, you'll meet Aunt Cecilia. I don't want to give up too much about her, because what you guys do with her and Cinnamon and what happens between them is really smart, and it really pushes a lot of Cinnamon's story forward without getting us lost in flashbacks. So I want to talk about that craft piece for a second. How do you balance moving the narrative where you need to, but keeping the backstory loose and manageable and not a distraction?
It's hard.
It's really hard. I was just going to say that. It's so hard.
And that is the answer.
Yeah. How many times did we say we've got to cut this back? Like, it was just, it was so backstory heavy too early in the novel, and that's always the case. But then where do you put it, and what do you do with it?
And you don't want to give too much away too early. I think what our guiding principle was in this book, and as an editor, I would always tell my writers, is that you want the character to be discovering what you want the reader to discover at the same time, right? So that's an organic way to bring in backstory when this is not going to give too much away, but when, Cinnamon gets a piece of mail.
Oh, yes.
Right? So we didn't need a lot of backstory before she gets this piece of mail because, then as in life, if something happens in your current life, then that's going to cause you to organically reflect on, your backstory. And so we tried to use those moments so that it really felt like it was unfolding and the reader was along for the ride, as opposed to, here's what you need to know, dear reader, in order to know who Cinnamon is. And we tried to avoid that.
It seems to me, too, that the way you handle class and the intersection of class and motherhood in this particular world is clearly something you guys have been thinking about since the first book. And there were also a couple of reviews that were like, well, you could have done more with class, because there's always a couple of reviews where they're like, you could have done more with, and you're like, yeah.
You could have written a whole different book.
You could have, and luckily you didn't.
Oh, wait, can I say my favorite? Favorite review though.
Say it too.
My favorite review that we've gotten so far is the main character's name was Cinnamon, and I just couldn't get past that. I just couldn't get past that.
Dude, I don't even know what to do with that. Wow. Okay, I don't even know what to do with that. But again, going back to this idea, though, that you've put this first book out into the world, the two of you, right? Pardon the bad sports metaphor, you left it all on the field, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've had this big shift in your relationship. You have learned how to write a novel together, which none of this is easy, right?
No.
And how much of both of these books have changed you as people? Not just as writers, but as people. And not just the pieces you've already talked about, but it seems like there's been a big shift in you. And granted, I mean, I'm working off of a lot of research, but I do my homework. It seems like there's been sort of a psychic shift.
That's fair.
You want to talk about that for a sec?
I think I've become more empathetic. I really do. I was a journalist for so long, and like different kinds of journalism, a lot of entertainment journalism, a lot of political journalism. And when you're in those fields, you just kind of almost flatten people sometimes because your job is to just report, right? Like you're going to report and you're going to get the facts and you're going to pump out that copy, especially when you're at a newspaper, right? And I think you lose track of the importance of the stories sometimes. But working on these books together, and not just the writing of the books, but the conversations they start, that we've been at over 200 book clubs. We've zoomed into people's homes all over the world. It's made me realize the beauty of just listening again and having these conversations with grace and respect and civility that I think I'd lost for a long time when my job was to just get words down on paper.
I think for me, you know, there's such an emotional component to writing that I completely underestimated as an editor. You know, it's like,
You really did.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, turn your revision in. It's due Friday. Here's my 13-page editorial letter. Have at it. And now I'm like, it's really hard. And so I think that is really like the emotional vulnerability, both in actual writing itself, when you're just, you know, home doing it. And then when you share it with somebody else, you know, and then it's in the world and you have reviews, and then you're talking to people and you're interacting with something, you know, about something you created. I mean, it really is like standing naked in front of people over and over again. And that you can't help but to change you as a person. You know what I mean? Like, I do feel like I walk in the world in a much more vulnerable way now than I did before.
Yeah, I mean, that vulnerability, you know, there are people in the world who think that reading is just a thing that you do, right? You're hanging out by yourself with a book. And it is, in fact, an act of communion, right? Totally. It is an act of communion. You're connecting with the writer. You're connecting with the characters. You're connecting with the world. It's not a solitary thing that you're doing it's just not a solitary thing. And when I think of all of the conversations that you probably have been able to start in places that no one was ready to have them, my eyes get really big because I'm like, well, this is what we're supposed to do with books and art and literature and we're supposed to be able to jumpstart this stuff and not just sit in our little corners. Sometimes it's easier to sit in your little corner. I am not the only person who's had those Thanksgivings. I refuse to believe I'm the only person who's had those Thanksgivings. But sometimes you have to be really willing to be vulnerable. And wow, the way you do it in both books, frankly, is a lot.
It is, and it's hard, but I think the gift of it is that we get a lot back. As hard as it is to be, you know, vulnerable, and honestly, you know, to be judged for your work and output, you know, the Goodreads reviews or what have you.
I'm not going to read them anymore. I'm done.
Oh, don't.
I know. I was in a dark place one day.
Well, I think it also, I mean, this is like a little bit of a sidebar, but we talked about this in a podcast the other day. I think part of the hard part about writing too, or any creative output, is that we live in a society where you want to say to yourself, and especially as women, like, I don't care what other people think, right? Like, I have to be in my lane, and I'm not going to be a people pleaser, and I'm just going to, you know, do my thing, and I'm not going to look at, you know, somebody else's Instagram vacation is so much better than mine, and her dress is so much better, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you put a book out in the world, the very definition of it is I hope you love this, right? And so
And
it's
love
hard.
me.
Yeah. It's hard to hold both of those. I mean, that's the part of the vulnerability. It's hard to hold both those truths at once. I think the thing that helps us and the gift of it is when we have these conversations and when we go to book clubs and we talk to people and they share with us, then it feels like it's like there's a purpose to it, right? We're not just saying, you know, didn't I write this amazing book and, you know, do you give me an A+ for it? That's not the point. The point is, did you get something out of it that we can connect on or that you can connect with somebody else on and talk about? And do you feel, you know, changed or moved or, you know, uplifted, what have you, as a result of this read? That is what makes it worth it.
Audience question. How do your families of origin react
I love a
to
family.
this work?
That's a good question.
Tracy hasn't read this one yet.
Oh, really?
No, I showed her that the book was dedicated to her, and I think she just kind of...
You know what? I was telling somebody the other day, my mom was like, oh, cool.
I know.
I was like, people think it's a big deal.
People
when
think
you
it's a big
dedicate
deal.
book.
I
My
know.
mom was
And
like, oh.
Yeah,
I
and
was like,
Trace was just like, okay,
the reprint edition, Lindsay, we're taking our moms out. Like, just read that.
take them out. Take them out. If they don't appreciate it, but she was funny with We Are Not Like Them, remember? Like, she really felt like her, because my mom, you know, lives in like the suburb, a really white suburb of Philly, and has, you know, lived like a fairly sheltered life too, without much diversity in it. And like, she like highlighted and underlined parts of We Are Not Like Them, and she's like, it just made me think about so many things. And like at some of our events, she would say those things that it made her think about.
Joe was like,
And I'm just like, but yeah, and I'm in a way that's who I was writing to and for, right? Because she like genuinely hadn't thought about those things before, and we saw that so many times in book clubs.
and you know, my parents were foster parents, and so that's been a big part of my family of origin and, you know, the circumstances around that. I've seen firsthand how complicated it is. It's really, I mean, any family configuration is complicated in different ways, right? There's just a unique set of complexities in foster care and adoption that did not make it directly into the page, but, you know, was inspired by this idea of the push and pull of creating family and chosen families and what a beautiful thing that can be, and also the complexities that arise. And anytime, honestly, in America, I mean, this is, you know, a little bit what we were trying to talk about in our first book too, when you're off the beaten path in any way, when you're outside like a very conventional, usually white nuclear family structure, if you know, there's adoption, if there's single parenting, if there's, you know, blended families, if there, whatever it is, which is actually fairly common, and yet there's all these complexities around being outside of that norm, aggressive explanation points. And so part of that is exploring how our characters feel, you know, really outside of that norm and how damaging that can be.
I think all of us here would agree that love is a really great thing and that we all aspire to it. But it is also a practice, though. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it takes work. And watching Cinnamon go through what she goes through and how she does it and the choices she makes is really kind of great, because she's exactly that person saying, okay, all right. I mean, when she's first figuring out the baby seat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about Cinnamon, and even that example, is that, you know, when you're pregnant and have a baby, there's a certain like assumption that you know what you're doing, or that you have to pretend that you know what you're doing or whatever. And Cinnamon, because of the circumstances by which she has this baby, has a lot more latitude to be like, you know, she's still suddenly, you know, in possession of an infant, is like, you know, she can be honest, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And so the reader can be along for that ride, which is, you know, scary.
The baby seat situation is funny that you mention it, because so, you know, Cinnamon's trying to put the baby carrier into the car seat, like in the back of the car, and she puts it what she thinks is the right way, which is facing forward so she can see the baby's face, like when she looks in the rearview mirror to make sure the baby's okay. And of course, all parents know, should never put the baby seat facing forward. Every time you go to the pediatrician, they're like, So the carrier's backwards in the car, right? And you have to be like, yes, of course it is. I know what I'm doing. I was like, Christine, like,
She's like, we're gonna get flack for this. We gotta make
like,
it.
people are gonna freak out.
The message boards, everyone's gonna say, put the baby seat
Put the
facing.
baby
I'm like,
in
but it's a normal
danger.
thing to do that. She didn't know
because
what to
people
do.
are insane about motherhood.
We had a whole conversation about this.
But it is, and what's so funny is that we prepared, with We Are Not Like Them, we prepared
Right.
to get a lot of feedback.
Yes.
And a lot of judgment. And for people to tell us we were getting it wrong. Because it was about gun violence and race and a police shooting. And we didn't prepare as much with this one, except for that car seat example. But I think the judgment is going to be even more because people have opinions about babies and motherhood. And we're already seeing that. And I think that's so interesting.
I agree.
I'm hoping, though, that all of the folks who are giving you feedback.
That's what we call it now.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal that. Because feedback seems to be part of our world now.
Sure is.
But I'm hoping some of them do actually maybe sit for a minute.
Yeah.
With whatever it is that's making them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In the novel, because I think there's a lot of room. I mean, I was very judgy, maybe about Cinnamon's husband, maybe super judgy.
Every character can't be perfect.
No, but every character has their place in the story, and I love the balance. And again, this goes back to my earlier point about nuance, that there is, okay, pardon the pun, there's no black and white in this story, and that's really, really important. And I think it's leading me to ask about your writing process, and I'm sitting on a bunch of questions actually from the audience about process and balance and how that process has changed between these two books. Because again, you have this wonderful sense of nuance. Everyone gets their character. Yes, it is Cinnamon's story, but everyone gets their arc, right? And you do a lot. You do a lot in this book. But I'm wondering if we can talk about how that relates to your working process between the two of you and that partnership.
So one of the things a lot of people assume that Christine writes all of the black character parts and I write all of the white character parts. That comes up so much to the extent that one interviewer just called us Jen and Riley for the whole interview. And it was like just this male old school radio host, and we just didn't correct. We weren't like, that's not how fiction works.
Like, now, Riley, what would you say?
Oh, what would you say? And I'm like, no. But also, the assumption is there with this one. And the truth is, we start with a really robust outline, and then we each just take parts of the book. We just start going, and then we start trading back and forth. And we work in a Google document, which Christine hated. So I'm just going to, for every book we do, I'm just going to remind you that you hated it. Yes.
But now I'm a convert.
But now she's a convert, because it's better. And we go back and forth. We'll write one chapter, and then the other one will go in and like layer onto it, or take things out, or be like, oh, I think you missed this. And that's actually such a gift, which I think I realized more in this book, because with We Are Not Like Them, we were still getting used to it.
Yeah.
And like editorial feedback can be jarring at first. I mean, I know most writers I know get their editorial letter, and the first time they read through it, they're like, ah, and then they sit with it for like 3 days, and they're like, oh no, that makes sense. Yeah, that's right. That's right. But with us, that happens in real time, constantly. And it was very jarring at first, but now I'm used to it, and it's so nice to have someone go through a chapter I wrote and say, oh, but we're missing this, and how about if we put this in action instead of dialogue, right? And it really is a gift to have someone that writes alongside you.
Yeah, and I was also going to say that, so much of writing is, it's a solitary act, but it's a collaborative endeavor, meaning it doesn't really matter what you've written if it's not resonating with a reader, right? So you need that feedback, and a lot of times if you're writing alone, you're making those decisions really in a vacuum, right? Does this make sense? Is this working? Is this boring? Is this the stupidest thing I've ever written in my entire life, et cetera, et cetera. And when you have somebody else with you in those trenches right away, I think, it speeds up that process of getting real-time feedback and just even the reactions of, is this working or not working, where most times the more conventional writing process is if you go and go and go, and then you turn it over to someone like Lindsay or Heather sitting next to her, any other editors in the room, and you say, what do you think of this?
Right.
And so it's just like a different way to get feedback, in a different time scale.
Everyone needs an editor.
Everyone
needs an editor.
Do not fear the editor. Do not fear everyone. I mean,
everyone needs
sometimes I grind out weird pieces of copy and I'm like, someone look at this please, because I don't want to send a weird thing out into the world. Do you have any advice for anyone who's looking to co-write a novel with someone else?
We've gotten actually a lot of questions about this, and I wonder if it does seem like more people are co-writing novels. Like this is like, I don't know if it's a trend.
There are definitely more co-written novels now, I think, than before. But I also think that many friends harbor this fantasy of, oh, this is the book we'd write together, right?
Definitely.
Kind of like that fantasy of like couples that are like, one day we'll buy an inn.
Same, the exact same fantasy.
Except my friend Casey did. She did. And it's lovely, Spruceton Inn. You should all go there in the Catskills. And so we get that a lot. And I think my best advice is that not everyone should write a book together, and that's okay. Right. And it is a lot of work, and it's like the communication struggles are real. I would liken this relationship, the closest parallel I have is my marriage, that we had to figure out how to communicate in different ways and really, really well and talk about things constantly. A writing pair should try it, but also don't be disappointed if it doesn't work out, because just like, I don't think you should necessarily work with your spouse or or every spouse or your best friend. And sometimes it won't work. And I think Christine and I also are very good at having a healthy separation now, where it's like, okay, we're spending this time together and we're working, and then we can do something socially too. But like and
there's some we had to have boundaries between work and
we're also equally. I think we have the same work ethic.
Definitely.
It won't work if you don't. If you ever feel like the other person is slacking, like it just creates this resentment. Whereas with the two of us, we pick up the slack for each other when it's like, oh, okay, like, do you have to give birth now? Okay, cool.
For example.
That story blew my mind. I'm sorry. You were editing with there was labor and you sent a manuscript?
I did. I sent the past couple manuscripts I sent Charlotte Walsh in while in labor. And then this one,
I don't know, Joe, it's a blur. Like, I really, I have no idea how old your children were at any moment in this process, because there were so many and it all just blurred.
There were so many books and so many children all at once.
Really.
Yeah, it was 4 books and 3 children
I was just watching a lot of Law and Order.
But then Christine, you did our whole copy edit.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't.
With COVID.
I had literally just given birth. Yeah.
Days before.
And then you had COVID, and I picked up the tail end of it when it came back. So
brutal time.
Yeah.
The one thing I was going to say is that in terms of a collaboration is I think you can't romanticize it. I think a lot of people have this idea of like, oh, we're going to do X, Y, Z together, and even a marriage, you can't really. I mean, it's nice to romanticize it, but in the end of the day, right, there are some practical realities there. And so I think, part of what we came up against in the early part of our relationship was like, this is so much harder than we thought it was going to be. So the expectations, I think if you go into it understanding that this is going to be, really hard, and it's not just, some sunshine and rainbows scenario that you're going to be in a sitcom of making a novel. Like, it's going to be messy and hard, and there are going to be good days and bad days, and that you're just going to have to be willing to navigate them, because you have a sense of commitment to each other, again, much like a marriage or a friendship, where you're like, not everything is just going to break us, right? We're going to keep going, and that requires intention.
We do have one more question that I'm also kind of curious about, because obviously you've got the podcasting thing happening. You're also doing freelance. Like, everyone has lots of stuff happening in terms of the work. And we have an audience question basically saying, can you talk about your workflow and how the novels fit into the workflow? Yeah. Because I do think, and we're not talking about loading the dishwasher. We're super not talking about loading the dishwasher. We're talking about building media empires, which, we should talk about this more.
Yeah, no, I think it really is the work ethic thing. I mean, Joe and I are both like really deadline focused. I mean,
We've never
where is Jade? Is Jade?
There's Jade. Yeah.
Jade will know that we have never missed a deadline.
We've never missed a deadline.
Period. Never. Any copy edit, flatbed, like whatever. We've never missed a deadline.
Yeah.
We're pretty
Giving
proud of
birth,
that.
COVID.
Yeah.
Didn't
Doesn't
miss
matter. Not
the deadline.
deterred.
No.
But I mean, that's really important to us to like show up for each other and to whoever we have, any deliverables to. And so
I freak out when I hear about people like missing their
it just
deadlines.
gives me talk about hives.
It's like, oh
Yeah,
my God, how? Why? How could that happen?
Even though when I was an editor, it happened all of the time. But I think we both really care about that accountability, and so that keeps us focused.
Right.
So whatever we have going on, we always have our project happening at the same time. So it's like, this chapter is due Friday. We create our own deadlines, right?
Yep.
And so we are showing it to the other person on Friday, or we're going to have this, talk about this chapter this day. So we just like keep the momentum going that way, and then whatever else we need to do. And that's why it honestly helps that we are not in touch verbally all of the time,
Right.
because we work on our own schedule. So Joe is like much more of a morning person than I am. I am not a morning person, as many people in this room can attest to. I need to ease in. I need to watch Law and Order, as I mentioned, and then I need to get my laptop out, etc. So we can work on our own time, and we're not kind of beholden to that schedule. So if there's other things that we need to do and prioritize, and the rest of the nature of our work with other things that we have to produce, we can try to control those deadlines too. So if Joe has something to do, like her Wilder podcast, which debuted at Tribeca today, I can pick up the slack, or vice versa. Like, so somebody is always working, even if we're not always working equally at the same time.
Right.
And also to manage the correspondence. I mean, just managing admin, right?
Yeah.
And so like we're texting each other, and Christine's like, all right, I'm going to write back to this email, or start a Google Doc for this interview that we have to do.
Yep.
Yeah, we just kind of divide and conquer, which is nice.
What's next?
I never knew you at all. Yeah.
I'm like, no, you do.
No, I do now.
Actually, that's the title of our next
That's the
book.
title of our next book. Yeah.
Okay, so 2024, 2025.
I mean, our editor's here, so now.
What-
2025.
Lindsay, what is it?
I mean, I realize I just got this one. I should not be greedy, but we're here. I'm asking the question.
But then we were joking, we have to stop writing books with pronouns in the titles.
Because it's
we
getting
just
really
keep-
hard in
We're like,
interviews.
we are
We're
not
like, you
always
were never
mine.
always
We
mine,
were- you
not
were always
you.
them.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, so-
very confusing.
So for book 4, you can figure something out.
Yeah, it's just going to be like a
we'll get through
bold,
3.
like, go, them.
go,
I mean, one noun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this one is exploring race.
It's actually perfect on Loving Day. It's about an
Loving Day.
interracial
It's about an
relationship.
interracial
of marriage.
relationship. Yeah. With a little bit more suspense in it. How much are we giving away? What are we, because
we're at the very beginning stages.
well,
But
we
let's
have
just say
100
it's-
pages, which
that's
isn't
true.
nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah, Lindsay,
that's not nothing.
100 pages already.
100.
100.
Give or
yeah.
take. But it's about an interracial marriage between a black woman and a white man, and what happens when this couple learns sort of a secret about the white man's father-in-law, who's in his 80s, and what he may or may not have done. His grandfather who raised him, but what he may or may not have done in the past, and how that learning of this upends their relationship, and this information comes to them by none other than Simone, the black woman's ex-boyfriend. So the plot thickens there, but it asks questions about, what is forgivable, and when, and, are we responsible for the transgressions of our youth, and how well do we know people, and what do we do when we learn information about people that we really don't want to have, and how do we act on that information? So we're enjoying the process.
It's good. Yeah, this one's a lot. I mean, I don't know why. I think we just know how to do it now.
Yeah, each iteration
Has
or
been
each
easier.
it's a little bit easier and a more seamless, but. We're excited. I guess we'll see you on stage in 2 short years.
The way time
like that.
Okay, the way time moves now.
I know, it's true.
I don't know how we got to 2023, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. Anyway, that said, thank you, Christine Pride, Joe Piazza.
Thank you.
You Were Always Mine is out now.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.